Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about addressing addiction, understanding how and why the addiction cycle takes hold through a neuroscience perspective. I'm Callie. A little bit about me. I'm a San Francisco native. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, but my background is also in neuroscience and psychopharmacology. Currently, I'm the behavioral health director for Fourth and Hope in Woodland, California, which is a residential substance use treatment program. So I'm able to blend all of my experience into one, and I'm hoping today's presentation is helpful and informative. So what is addiction? It's a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive substance or behavior seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. So today we're going to talk about different types of addiction, food addiction, substance addiction, and the behavioral addictions as well. So the addiction cycle is really the best place to start. So the stages of addiction, we have initial use, so usually triggered by curiosity, stress, or we just want to feel better. It escalates into increased use or increased frequency to achieve the desired effects, feeling better typically. We can have dependence where the body and the brain adapt and it leads to withdrawal symptoms if you stop, which we will get into. And then relapse, so returning to the addictive behavior or substance, whatever it may be. So we usually have an emotional trigger, turns into a craving, we have a ritual around it, and then we use, which is a general term for just engaging in whatever our addictive patterns are. Then we usually feel bad, which causes another emotional trigger, and it goes all over again. So the neuroscience of addiction, which I'm super interested in, it really is interesting because addiction is based on our brain's reward system. So we have neurotransmitters in our brains, we have different chemicals that float around in there, and one of those neurotransmitters is called dopamine, and it's responsible for feeling good. It's a reward neurotransmitter. It's sort of like pleasure, winning, feeling better. So dopamine plays a huge piece, um, and then addiction. So the dopamine is one piece, and then addiction really hijacks our brain system and our pleasure system by creating a dopamine deficit. So our brain no longer produces as much dopamine once we have these external sources for dopamine. And then when we lose dopamine in our brain, that leads to cravings and then compulsive behavior. So addictive behavior seeking, we're looking to feel better overall. Neuroplasticity, the brain changes in response. So neuroplasticity is a general term relating to how our brain can change. So with addiction, it changes for, I don't want to say the worst, but it's a negative change, if you will, and so it reinforces our addictive patterns, which is not necessarily a good thing. So we have food addiction, so keep in mind the dopamine piece. We typically have, we'll look at the addiction cycle real fast. On the right side, we have the emotional triggers, so whether that's boredom, sadness, fear, stress, whatever sort of discomfort you're feeling leads to the food craving. Some people it's a specific food, some people it's comfort food, some people it's just snacking in general. Some people have sort of the like action that's related to food. And then we have the food action. So you go and grab a snack or you go and get the food, you plan on it. And once you engage and you eat, the dopamine is released, we feel a little bit better, and then now eating and snacking has become reinforced in our neural connections, and that dopamine cycle begins. So typically, it's highly palatable foods, meaning really delicious food. So sugary, fatty, salty, crunchy, right? All those really yummy snack foods, sweet foods, that causes the dopamine release the most. And then it just reinforces our food seeking behaviors, and over time, the overeating or over frequently snacking can lead to a substance use disorder. So it's food is a substance. We sort of see it all in the same breath. Specific substance use, which is typically what I see in my line of work. So it's alcohol, drugs, illegal substances, even prescription medication misused. The number one substance we see is methamphetamine. And so neurological or neurochemical changes are caused by this substance. So in the picture to the right, we have methamphetamine sort of flooding the cells. So this is a synapse. It's one neuron meeting another neuron, and in between is really where dopamine and all these neurotransmitters are released, and that's what sends the message, hey, this feels really good. So instead of dopamine dumping, we have methamphetamine sort of tricking the brain into thinking it needs to release dopamine. So we get this surge of, wow, I feel really good, or I feel much better. Same with food, wow, I feel so much better. And over time, that rewires the brain to build tolerance. So you need more, more, and then physical dependence eventually. You cannot feel better without said substance, whether it's illegal drugs or food, again. And so the impact of alcohol or drug or food on neurotransmitters is, again, it just tricks the brain into releasing less and less dopamine on its own, and then you become dependent on external sources of dopamine. Behavioral addictions are real as well. So typically we think of drugs, we think of food, but behavioral addictions like gambling, internet use, gaming, shopping, gossiping is even addictive, creates an addictive cycle in the brain, negative thinking, all of these can create really maladaptive patterns in your brain. So similar brain pathways are activated, just like in substance use addiction, especially in the reward system. So it feels really good to gossip, usually with coworkers or friends. It can feel really good to game for a long time. It can feel good to scroll on your phone mindlessly for a long time, right? So all of that can become an addiction. And the cycle of compulsive behaviors creates just tons of challenges with treating them because it's not necessarily an external factor. It's not a drug you can remove. It's not a food you can remove. It is a pattern of thinking or of behavior. So it's a little trickier to sort of address. But if you are able to break the dopamine pattern and sort of interrupt the cycle, you can absolutely overcome it. So the long-term effects on the brain of any type of addictive cycle or use, um, we have different brain parts. So on the right, we have different brain regions affected by addiction. We have our prefrontal cortex, it's for judgment, decision making. We have our amygdala, it's like a tiny almond right in the center of our brain. It's for stress and anxiety, fight or flight, our limbic system, so our emotion regulation. And then our basal ganglia, kind of a funny name for where we keep our rewards and motivation system and our habits and our behaviors. So we have shrinkage in the prefrontal cortex, so we become less inhibited, and we're making poorer decisions. And then the amygdala shifts, so then we have lower frustration tolerance. We're not as good with our emotions. We have impaired decision making, self-control, and emotion regulation all together. All of that just creates a trigger because you want to feel better. So it really hijacks our reward system in the brain, creating cravings and additional compulsive behavior, which is not good. So to break the cycle, which is what I work on in my field, is there's a few therapeutic approaches. So evidence-based approaches through therapy. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. I feel like a lot of people have heard of that, where we identify triggers and we modify the thinking around it in order to modify the behavior. We have motivational interviewing, where we ask a ton of questions to really elicit certain responses that are helpful for motivating some change. And then if it's a substance, typically the substances we see, there's medication-assisted treatment. So you can essentially replace one substance. Not everyone is on board with that, but the goal is to titrate off of all substances. And then, of course, lifestyle changes, nutrition, exercise, those things, of course, boost dopamine naturally. Having fun is a huge way to boost dopamine naturally and in a healthy way, of course. And then mindfulness and meditation to rewire our brain's reward system is also very effective. Ultimately, a holistic, multidisciplinary approach is most effective in breaking it. So you want a little bit of everything in order to have a really rounded out approach in breaking the cycle. There's also brain training techniques. We have neurofeedback, cognitive training, EMDR, which involves eye movement across the bilateral body line. We have something called brain spotting to really get at that trauma that might be contributing to some of the behaviors. And then again, we have medications that can assist in the addiction recovery realm. And then, of course, support groups, communities in recovery, creating a really healthy environment and shifting the support that you feel in that sense is extremely helpful. Prevention and support, not always easy for everybody, not always available for everyone, but early intervention, like in schools, community centers, workplaces, super helpful. Obviously, having a support system is always best. It doesn't have to be family or friends. It can actually be external support groups, a therapist, anything that can help you sort of maintain your accountability and on track. And then promoting mental health awareness to prevent addiction from even taking root in the first place is often very helpful. And of course, education and support to just reinforce healthier brain pathways and healthier behaviors. So, with that, I've included a couple resources to finding treatment, what does treatment look like, a national hotline, and then I've also included the link to Contra Costa specific alcohol and other drug services. There's different treatment programs on that page, and I'm sure you can reach out to your local county folks as well for some of that. So thank you so much, and hopefully this was